Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. So today I have two guests, two young ladies who are seeking to change the world in their own little niche. One is trying to change the world through effective communication, and one is trying to change the world by transforming education. And you know, both of these women are very, very cerebral, and they're pretty distinctive personality-wise, but their heart is the same. And it was really, really cool to have both of them come on and talk about their work. And I hope that you will develop the same appreciation that I have for them by listening to them. And yeah, I just think you'll enjoy the conversations. We're in some perilous times that if you've been listening to the podcast or just paying attention to what's going on, you already know that. But I got a couple of thoughts about that I'm going to share with you later on. But yeah, I think this is going to be a good podcast for y'all to really listen to because we got to get into some really, really good discussions. And it's just always a reminder there are people out here that's doing the work. So anyway, let's go ahead and kick this off. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Erik. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Alaska, where a tentative agreement was reached towards Russia ending their war with Ukraine. The Texas legislature adjourned their first special session, and Governor Greg Abbott called a second session as Democratic lawmakers continue employing tactics to prevent a quorum and a Texas redistricting plan from being adopted. California Governor Gavin Newsom unveiled plans to ask voters to approve a ballot measure to redraw the state's congressional map to create more Democratic seats. President Trump deployed 800 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. and took control of the city's police department. A Georgia man who blamed the COVID-19 vaccine for his depression attacked the CDC headquarters in Atlanta, firing over 180 shots, breaking 150 windows, and killing a police officer before he later died. A U.S. judge has denied a request from the Justice Department to unseal grand jury records from Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking case. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the recent tax and spending law will result in 10 million more Americans becoming medically uninsured over the next decade. President Trump has removed Billy Long as the IRS commissioner and replaced him with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who will serve in an acting capacity. 3 people were shot and wounded in Times Square, New York, with a 17-year-old male now in police custody. A former New York corrections officer was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the beating death of Robert Brooks, an African-American inmate. A Ugandan judge denied bail to opposition figure Kizza Besigye, who has been in jail on treason charges for 9 months. And the Trump administration is considering reclassifying marijuana to a less dangerous drug category. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guest, Anat Shenker-Osorio, host of the Words to Win By podcast and principal of ASO Communications. Anat Shenker-Osorio examines why certain messages falter where others deliver. She has led research for new messaging on issues ranging from freedom to join together in union to clean energy and from immigrants' rights to reforming criminal justice. Anat's original approach through priming experiments, task-based testing, and online dial surveys has led to progressive electoral and policy victories across the globe. Anat delivers her findings packed in snark at venues such as the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Center for Australian Progress, Irish Migrant Center, Open Society Foundations, Ford Foundation, and Lush International. Her writing and research is profiled in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Boston Globe, Salon, The Guardian, and Grist, among others. She is the author of Don't Buy It, The Trouble with Talking Nonsense About the Economy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Anat Shenker-Osorio. All right, Anat Shenker-Osorio. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
Well, my standard answer these days is there could be less fascism, but I'm awake.
Yeah.
I'm vertical.
Yeah. Look, I understand. And, you know, I'm thankful because of my anger with the current president is the reason why I have a podcast. So that's the silver lining I have to go with on that. So what I want to do is I want to get into it, and usually I do a couple of icebreakers. So the first icebreaker is a quote. The only people that get rich playing by the rules are the people that make the rules. What's your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably see you that quote and raise you that the entire concept of the rule of law is actually just that the rulers get to decide what the law is in every dimension, not just around economics, but around who gets to speak and what they get to say, who gets to move through the world and how, who gets to love who they want to love, who gets to reside where they desire to reside, and pretty much everything else, every facet of our lives. And so we change our laws to comport with our values. We do not change our values to comport with our laws. And when we hold up rule of law or the law as the ultimate arbiter of what purportedly is good and right, instead of an actual value like justice or equality, then we quickly fall prey to the situation that we are in right now, where many people on the left, and especially sort of more mainstream Democratic circles, have been yelling since, I don't know, at least 2020, no one is above the law, no one is above the law, as if we were running for hall monitor, which is everybody's favorite person. It's very attractive. It's very compelling. Everyone wants to vote for the hall monitor. And then it whips around. And now, of course, we are subjected to an endless litany of right-wing people justifying everything from, throwing Senator Alex Padilla to the ground to grabbing that judge in Milwaukee to, whatever happens between now and 5 minutes from now, saying that they're allowed to do this because no one is above the law, because the law is in and of itself is not a value.
Yeah. And I know that the playing by the rules thing is not your favorite phrase based on my research. And it was like, ironically, I was watching a CNBC interview with Hakeem Jeffries, and the clip they showed, that was the first thing he said. Well, we got to play by the rules. And I was like, ooh, I better not play this clip for a Nazi. She's going to cuss the next speaker out. All right. So the next icebreaker is what we call 20 questions.
Okay.
So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
18.
Okay. What's one thing we might all agree is important, no matter our differences?
I think almost universally that most of us believe that we want to move through our lives and be with our loved ones and be able to put food on the table and be home in time to eat it.
Yeah. Yeah. That should be universal. I don't know who would be opposed to that, but yeah, that seems to be a universal theme. So let's get into it a little bit. Why did you decide to use your talents for politics?
I guess I'm self-loathing. Well, I had the experience as a very young child I can go into the story. Basically, my first ever school memory, my parents sent me to kindergarten young. They'd had enough of me, so I was 4. And we had all been given these notebooks, and each notebook had a very nice cover. Mine had the Muppet Show on it. That's how old I am. And the teacher was called into the principal's office and so said to us, okay, all of you just like draw on the first page of your notebook. I have to just go. Because, this was in an era where this would happen. Your listeners are like, what is she talking about? But you'll back me up. Teachers did things like this. And she'd been gone roughly 0 seconds when a bunch of the kids started picking on one boy in particular. And they grabbed his notebook and they ripped the cover off and they're making fun of him. And he was crying. When the teacher came back, she saw this scene and she said, okay, I'm taking all of your notebooks. And she took back all of our notebooks. And I said, but most of us were not doing anything. Like most of us were not harming this kid. And she said, but did you stand up for him? Did you try to stop them? Did you say anything? I was like, no, I was drawing in my notebook like you told me to do. And she said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Mm.
And that has pretty much been my guiding force, or at least I hope it's my guiding force. And I think that I decided to get into politics because I was absolutely determined to try to make the world better, as cheesy and hackneyed as that sounds. And I think there are many, many different ways that people do that. I think the arts is an incredible way. I think that cooking for people is an incredible way. I think that being in medicine is I'm not arguing that there's only one way to do that by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a person who thinks a lot about language. I grew up in a multilingual household. I grew up with a very strong interest in linguistics. My mother's an interpreter. She speaks 7 languages. And so I just have always had a facility with and an understanding of words, and not just what they mean, but how they alter people's perceptions of what is true, what they desire, what they want to have happen. And so I think that it was sort of that idea of trying to speak more effectively about the world we want to create, and also more effectively about the foes that we face, that kind of got me here.
Yeah. Well, your story is cooler than mine. When I was 3 years old, I saw in the World Book Encyclopedia the article about presidents of the United States, and I said, "Ooh, I want that job." And so that was the start of my journey. it wasn't a life lesson kind of thing, but that's cool. That's cool that a teacher felt that a 4-year-old could understand that. And I think
Yeah.
and obviously has had a pretty positive impact, at least from my perspective anyway. So talk to the listeners. There's a couple of things that you talk about on your website, and one of them is the race class narrative. So talk about that, and how has that been utilized since 2017?
Oh, big topic. So in 2016, when the first Trumpocene began, I was a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, specifically at the law school, named Ian Haney Lopez, who famously wrote the book Dog Whistle Politics, about what I'm going to guess, you can guess it's about, dog whistling. And he'd come to me, we'd met through a mutual friend, and basically said, I've been running around the country trying to tell different operatives, Democrats, progressives, that actually this idea that we should just talk about race, which some people espouse, and sort of center racial justice framing, which is obviously incredibly important. And then other people arguing very loudly that talking about race is a distraction and we just need to do, quote, colorblind economic populism, because that's the thing that everyone can get on board with. And, you know, like everyone knows what it is to have more month than check. Doesn't matter how much melanin you got. And so that is actually the way even to racial justice, because of the overlay between race and class. And basically his argument was that you have to do both. And he had been trying to make this argument over and over. And as sort of Democratic operatives are wont to do, the rejoinder that he was receiving most of the time was, yes, but do you have testing that would work? Because, of course, in the what I like to call pollingism, there's like a massive illness that has infected Democratic thought processes, big D, that like we have to poll everything and everything needs to be polled and we need to just figure out what people purportedly already want, which is fixed and immovable. And we just have to figure out what it is, take the temperature, and then repeat it back to them. I don't know if we're going to come back to that topic, but basically I could yell about that for 7,000 hours and like all of the ways that it is wrong. But I'm going to answer your question. So we embarked on this project. We brought on board then president of the think tank Demos, Heather McGhee, who went on to write a book called Some of Us. It's largely about this phenomenon as well. And basically what we did, and I'm a researcher too, you know, for the crap I just threw at polls, it's not that there's no utility, it's that you only get answers to the questions you ask. And it's extraordinary what you can make happen when you decide which questions to ask and which ones not to. So we first did a bunch of qualitative research where we did focus groups, but we also did these really interesting dyads where we would have a mom and a son, or we would have two best friends who had been, you know, pals since college or high school, whatever. And one of them would be more decidedly progressive on both economic and racial dimensions, and then the other more right wing. And so we weren't just sort of having conversations with groups, we were watching people trying to persuade the people in their own orbit. Because the basis of all of the work that I do, including the race class narrative, which now actually we've innovated to the race class gender narrative more recently, is rooted in the idea that if your words don't spread, they don't work. And if the base, which I like to think of as the choir, is not going to sing from the songbook, the congregation's not going to hear the joyful noise and go out and convert new adherents. And this fundamental idea, which is like the basis of every successful, not just social movement, but, you know, the Christianity, Islam, like basically anything that has become a phenomenon in human society, period, ever, seems to be remarkably lost in this notion that we can just sort of like figure out this milquetoast thing that everyone's going to kind of sort of agree with. So the race class narrative is basically an architecture. It's a structure of a message, and that structure is values, villain, vision, which we've simplified in the hopes that everyone can easily remember it and pull it off. And what you do is you sort of fill in the bits with what you need to talk about. And the way that you fill in the bits is that you begin by opening with a shared value, which I will model in a second. And as opposed to the left-wing standard, which usually a message will begin, boy, have I got a problem for you. Or this is the Titanic, would you like to buy a ticket? Or we're the losing team, we lost recently, so you should join us. That's how we like to begin messages. That doesn't work. So instead, we open with a shared value, not a outcome. So a shared value would be, no matter what we look like or where we come from, most of us believe that people who work for a living ought to earn a living. A shared outcome would be, no matter what we look like or where we come from, all of us are subject to the same amounts of discrimination. That second thing is just a lie, and that's not a shared value. And the reason that I get all in the weeds about this is because people will sometimes misunderstand and be like, wait, you're saying that we have to say that everyone has it the same? I'm like, nope, definitely not. I'm saying that you name a big we on the basis, ironically, of sort of the opening question you asked me, what is something we hold in common? Because yes, our experiences are different, and yes, our outcomes are different, and that is not accidental, but our aspirations, our dreams, our desires, our hopes, even for most of us, unfortunately not everybody, the things we believe in. So another example of a shared value would be, in America, we value our freedoms. So you open with a shared value. Then the second sentence, not the first, is where you name the problem. We call this the villain sentence because we do not name the problem in passive terms. So we do not say wages are falling as if they got heavier, or democracy is eroding as if we left it out too long and too much rain fell on it. We say, but today, MAGA Republicans, or but today, a wealthy and powerful few, or but today, this asshole. It depends on what the message is going to be about, right? Is it going to be about passing rent control in your city, or is it going to be about the government, the regime trying to turn our government into a weapon? So it depends on the topic. But that middle sentence is, but today, villain is trying to divide us from each other, hoping that if they can make us shame and blame Black people or new immigrants or exploit our lack of familiarity with trans folks, we will turn against each other and they can continue to pick our pockets, steal our health care, and abduct our neighbors. That's me making the sentence longer than it needs to be because it depends what you're going to talk about. But the middle sentence is where you narrate the dog whistle. You basically say, hey, look, if you'd like to know where your money went, it's the people who have all the money. The people who have all the money, they took your money. And Jose, who's sitting in front of Home Depot trying to get some day labor, he has no money. So the people with the money, they took your money. But if they can talk you into believing that it is newcomers or that it is Black folks, of course, coded as Milwaukee in my home, my state of origin, Wisconsin, which of course is a dog whistle. Everybody from Wisconsin can tell you what Milwaukee means, just like everyone from Michigan can tell you what Detroit means. Then they can continue screwing all of us over. So that middle bit is the villain. It's where you make the connection between the scapegoating on the basis of race or the attacks on the basis of gender or the attacks on the basis of immigrant status. And then the third sentence, which is a return to the positive, is, but we know better. We can reject their hatred and lies and join together to demand, the wages we all deserve if, again, it was going to be about wages. And so the race class narrative, that's more or less how it works. There's resources, everything under the sun. Everything we do is open source, so you can see it on our website. There are so many places where we've been able to implement this. The shining star first example where we did a full-blown campaign on using the race class narrative was in Minnesota. This was in 2018 when Republicans in the state, having come within around 10,000 votes of almost winning in 2016, were like, ah ha ha, we shall dog whistle more. And they saw in that endeavor the Somali American population, which is large in Minnesota, especially relative to how white that state is. And so that population is primed for what I think of as the turducken of hatred, because those folks are Black, they're Muslim, and they're immigrants. So basically, any way you want to slice the meanness, you got yourself an angle. And they began pumping out endless stories about suitcases full of cash sent to Mogadishu, Somali daycare fraud, that the daycare program, the childcare program that the state had, there was, a lot of folks in the daycare system who were Somali American. And supposedly they're taking these sweet, sweet bundles of cash because everybody knows the richest people in our society are childcare providers. That is how you get rich in America, is by providing childcare. This is a pro tip for you listeners. Like, if trying to figure out a career path, that's it. That's the money path. So don't do hedge funds, don't do VC, don't come to Silicon, don't abduct neighbors and steal, people's information and basically, like, no, that's not it. So that was having potency and resonance because, of course, that's what the purpose of this dog whistling has always been from time immemorial. And, Nixon, that was the basis of his Southern strategy. Basically, like, if you can get poor whites to at least view themselves as better than African Americans, then they'll go along with the rich landowning whites basically fucking them over too. Sorry, I didn't ask if I could swear. Here I go. So basically, we ran this campaign that we called Greater Than Fear, because in Minnesota, they call the rural parts of the state Greater Minnesota. They like to make up weird words for things. They call Duck Duck Goose Duck Duck Grey Duck, which is the most controversial thing about Minnesota, and people need to know because it's wrong. I digress. So we did this campaign. It had a look, it had a logo, it had radio ads, it had digital ads, it had this beautiful poster, which was iconic, people pushing the car out of the snow. And it had Dogs Against Dog Whistling, beautiful dog contest. It had hot dish around the world, where people would come together and make Laotian hot dish and Somali hot dish and Mexican hot dish. Hot dish is, for the non-Midwestern listeners, it's basically cancer in a Pyrex. But people like to eat it. I'm from the Midwest, so I'm allowed to say this. And it basically, what we did was we just kind of shoved this idea that we are greater than fear. So what that sounded like was, in Minnesota, we know long winters and we know how to dig our neighbors out of the snow. So whether it's your first Minnesota winter or your 50th, we've all been there. And when certain politicians try to make us afraid of each other, we know that means they've got nothing else to offer. There's lots of ways to be Minnesotan, and all of them are greater than fear. That was our main ad copy because it was C3. So we were more judicious in the call out. And it works. It not only was what the outside groups used, and when I say used, I mean SEIU Minnesota, I mean Take Action Minnesota, I mean Faith in Minnesota, I mean Unidos, I mean the Somali Worker Center, I mean Education Minnesota, the Teachers Union. Instead of going door to door and doing a different message for each group, which makes it impossible to break a signal through the noise, they all went out canvassing in their Greater Than Fear shirts, and they had a Greater Than Fear script about driver's licenses for undocumented, about taxes, about school funding, about childcare, about, whatever their thing was. So people were hearing Greater Than Fear, Greater Than Fear, Greater Than Fear over and over. And it became so popular that actually then candidate, now Governor Tim Walz, adopted it as his messaging, as did we had two Senate races that year because of Al Franken, and, also in the Minnesota House. Anyway, won all the races that we participated in that year, then did a version of that in 2020, obviously in the midst and the wake of the horrific George Floyd murder, having to deal with all of the sort of, you can't even go to the Twin Cities. Governor Walz owes an apology to suburban moms. We had to clap back to that. We did this whole I'm a Suburban Mom campaign. Just basically, instead of either accepting the idea that you just don't talk about race, which is a fiction, because basically it's as if you're handing people headphones and in one ear is blasting horrific, terrible dog whistles, and in the other there's silence. So this idea that we can just not talk about race, or just not talk about immigrants, or just not talk about queer people, we don't get to decide, because politics isn't solitaire. Our voters are hearing all this crap. And if there's nothing in counter, to that crap, then our economic promise can't break through. And so, Minnesota's one example. We use the race class narrative in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota again, Michigan in 2020. We've used it in other countries very successfully. In Australia, we used elements of it in the Lula Bolsonaro race, which I worked on in Brazil in 22. We used elements of it just now in the defeat of Le Pen. I mean, just a little bit ago in France, successfully as pushback against the AfD in Germany. I could go on and on because I work internationally.
So I wanted to play this little game, and I'm going to cut it because of time. But this is from your Freedom Over Fascism toolkit.
Yep.
So what I want you to do is close your eyes and listen to me read one of the posts that you put out there. And you tell me which Democrat or progressive comes to mind when you hear this phrase. And so I'm just going to pick one for the sake of time. Any elected official who lies to the American people, stokes violence and division, and refuses to take responsibility is unfit to represent us. We must come together to hold the MAGA Republicans who have harmed us to account. Who is the person that's out there now that you think best articulates that?
That best articulates that? Maybe not in those exact words, but James Tallarico, the Texas representative, I think. Not her vernacular, but staying in Texas, Jasmine Crockett. She would express it differently, but that vibe. I think Tim Walz would say a version of that in Minnesota. I think J.B. Pritzker would say a version of that, Illinois. Yeah.
So those names you mentioned, are these people that you've identified as clear spokesmen for the Democrats, or do we really have one?
I mean, I think those are some of our best examples of people who are actually understanding that we are in an epic raging battle against fascism, not inflation, although inflation is also real. And that unless we are clear about the foe that we are facing, we have absolutely no hope of defeating them. So I hold them up as, among elected leaders, better examples.
So what happened in your mindset, happened message-wise in 2024?
Oh, my goodness. Well, there are so many things that happened, but from my view, and an election isn't one thing. The United States isn't one thing. Life is complicated. There's a lot of people. So this is by necessity a simplification, because otherwise can't talk about things unless you pick a lane, right? I can't drive in all the lanes. I'm going to pick this one. In my view, once we changed candidates and we had Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, we had a halcyon 6-week period in which Harris was running on kind of everything that I would advise, not everything that I would advise, because, still a center. I mean, the Democratic Party is a right-wing party in any other country context. Like in a European context, it's a right-wing party. So when I say like the best, I mean the best within sort of not greatness that is the United States political reality. And what I mean by that is sort of embodying the edict that if you want people to come to your party, you got to throw a better party. If you want people to come to your cause, you need to be attractive. And the way that you be attractive is like any other magnet. You understand that you have to have a polarity, which means that you will draw people in, but you will also repel people. And there is actually no way to draw people in without repelling other people. Because the alternative, the pollingism version, is that you're just sort of blandly inoffensive to the greatest number of people, which means that you don't have a choir that wants to sing your tune. You don't have people that are excited to go and convince other people that they should also be excited to vote in the first place and to vote for you. And in that 6 weeks is when there was lots of freedom. I mean, revisit her opening ad. and look back at the work that we had done in 2022, a whole collection of us with the Protect Our Freedoms campaign. I have a podcast episode about it where I go through the messaging. It was that in America, we value our freedoms. Above all, our freedom to pick our leaders and have a say over the decisions that impact our lives. But today, MAGA Republicans trying to take away those freedoms, from our freedom to decide what happens to our body to our freedom to earn a good living and have a good life. Like, listen to that ad again, the first one. She picked Tim Walz. Again, I've worked in Minnesota since 2018. It's been a long time. Tim Walz has been through an extraordinary amount of information and knowledge and training in the race class narrative, thanks to the folks in Minnesota. And he's mastered the clapback, right? He's mastered the kind of unflappable, ooh, I want to feed children, like, how dare I, instead of getting defensive. Andy Bashir is another example of this. And shout out to Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, who've done great RCN work in that state. You know, it's Charles Booker from The Hood to the Holler. It's basically first create a big we and then make clear that the villains are the villains because of the harms they are doing to particular communities, but also because if they can, you got to point your finger at the bad guy, not the brown guy, right? That's like the essence of RCN. So that was going on. You know, he's an unserious man who is a very serious threat. Great line. And voter registration was like through the roof. People were happy. They were excited. Our focus groups, it was if, like, you know, the clouds had parted and people were suddenly, you know, hopeful and joyful and like, oh my goodness. And then the adults came. The adults came into the room and they said, oh, no, no, no. There has been too much fun at this party, and there has been too much economic populism in this platform. And Jacobin did a really good analysis. They developed what we call in linguistics a corpora, where they took every word that she publicly uttered over the course of her campaign, speeches, ads, etc. So this is an objective analysis. This is not like an impressionistic, I sort of feel this is what happened. And they traced how her economic discourse altered. And in the first 6 weeks, she was saying concrete things, because you also have to say concrete things. She said, I'm going to raise the minimum wage. Fuck this shitty wage. She talked about price controls. There was half a second. You want to talk about if you know, having a polarity. She talked about price controls. Trump went ballistic, right? They were like, she is a communist. She's going to control prices. Imagine if the debate all through the election, instead of being about the border, which is having the argument that MAGA wants to have, instead of having the argument you want to have, which is like debate 101. Debate 101 is, if you want to win the debate, you have to pick the terms. Had she stuck with, yeah, motherfucker, I'm going to price control. And you know what? I'm going to stick a capital gains tax. And all you rich assholes, all of you billionaires that have been profiting off of this pandemic and bankrolling your own lives while you steal from ours, it's about time that the people who do well in America do right by America. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm not saying everyone would have agreed with that. They would not have agreed with that. But most people actually do believe that. And then that would have been the debate. He would have been attacking her about price controls instead of attacking on terms she then responded to by basically being Republican light, which is the problem that center-left parties, the mistake that center-left parties make all over. We just watched it happen where Law and Justice came back into power in Poland after a heroic, extraordinary victory in 22. This year, they came back into power because the center-left governing party tried to do a, Law and Justice light. And what happens when you give people the full fat version and the low calorie version of the same thing, they want the full fat, because what you've done is you've let the other side control the terms of the debate. If you want to score a goal, you have to move the ball, not be crying that it's over there on the wrong side of the field. I realize I'm saying many things at once. So what happened is that her economic discourse, for one, actually changed. And again, this is not an impression. This is like a cataloged fact, away from, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, to, the capital gains. She walked back. Like, she literally walked back the amount that she was in support of. The adults came into the room, and by the adults, I mean the funders, and they said, oh, no, no, no. And the campaign began to speak in vague platitudes around the opportunity economy because, they had this notion that they had to present an economic argument, but they couldn't actually do so because they were hemmed in terms of what kinds of policies they were capable of saying they wanted. Contrast that with Mamdani, who's like, I'm going to freeze your rent, make the buses free, and I'm going to open public grocery stores. That you can take home, that you can remember, that you can imagine what that will feel like inside of your wallet. It's not some sort like, what is the opportunity economy and is it going to make me dinner? I don't think so. So that plus, a healthy helping of the Cheney of it all. And this kind of, we will appeal to these moderate swing voters, even though there's like 7 of them left and they all had to quit their jobs so that they could be in focus groups full time because we're so obsessed with them. Like every pollster wants them in their focus groups. Instead of recognizing that you actually had to make the debate about 2 extraordinarily different futures. One in which you would have your freedoms, and the other in which the MAGA Republicans would control you and decide your future for you. And, that's my view of what happened.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to narrow it down because, like I said, I wrote down a whole lot of questions for you, and I knew that this was going to be enlightening. So now I gotta discipline myself. So in hindsight, was Michelle Obama wrong?
About what?
The classic line, when they go low,
when they go low.
Yeah.
I think that there's a pretty strong misunderstanding of what it means to go high.
Okay.
I think that the way that when they go low, we go high was understood and interpreted was we remain polite. We observe the norms and the standards of the august offices like the filibuster, for example, in the Senate. To me, none of that is going high. If you're breaking into my house and you're going to set the place on fire and you're going to drag out my children and you're going to hurt them, the absolute highest place I can go is to throw my body and to kick and to scream and to punch and to fight to stop you. And I think that, maybe I'm evading the question. I think the way that we go high was understood, and maybe even the way that she meant it. And that part I can't know because I'm not inside her brain. Yeah, that was wrong. And the reason that it was wrong is because you cannot appease a fascist. You cannot play nice with a bully. You cannot norms and standards, especially when those norms and standards are built out of such fundamentally undemocratic ideas. And when, we're in focus groups since the beginning of 2021, we're now like 270 focus groups in with disaffected Democratic and swing voters. So every week listening to these people. It's an explanation for why I have the attitude that I do. And among the higher information ones, which is rare, but still, when we were talking to them in 2024, one of the most common things that we would hear is, you told us in 2020 to turn out to protect our freedoms. You told us that everything was on the line and that, and I don't know, but it seems to me that Dobbs fell on Democrats' watch. I don't know, but it seems to me that all of these anti-voter restrictions that were passed in southern states happened when Democrats were in charge. I don't know, but it seems to me, and this is what the higher information ones would say, that you had a trifecta and you didn't pass voting rights and you didn't codify Roe. And so you're telling me now that I need to turn out to protect my freedoms? How would voting for Democrats achieve that? Because here's the thing. As much as I am messaging lady and studying perception and persuasion and coming up with, not just like words, but stories and overarching narratives, there is absolutely nothing that you can say, anyone can say, that is louder than what you do. And you cannot tell people that the house is on fire and then refuse to run in and douse it with water or take the people out of the burning building. And so going high in practice, whether she meant it or not, and this is the part I don't know, amounted to there is, an increasing authoritarian threat, or like there is, a mounting pressure and there's anti-democratic and democracy's eroding, like I said before. But then you don't actually act. But then you don't actually use the power of your office. And one of the exercises that we often would do with voters, not always, but we would ask them, if you had to liken the Democratic Party to an animal, what animal would it be? And pretty much without exception, and this is among Democratic voters, among swing voters, etc., people would say a slug, a sloth, a turtle, or a tortoise. More recently, the animals have changed and they've become a deer in headlights. Roll over and play dead, a possum, whatever. And when we ask that of Republicans, they always name an apex predator, a lion, a tiger, a shark. And they say it like this, I don't agree necessarily with what they're doing, but you got to give them credit. They get what they want done. They're in the majority. They're in the minority. They get what they want done. I don't know. How is it possible that the filibuster doesn't impact them? How is it possible that even in the minority, they can block things? How is it possible that, President Obama couldn't have Merrick Garland as his judge? Like, they somehow manage it. And so how are people meant to believe that we are knocking on fascism's door? And by the way, we're no longer knocking, like we're living in the house. And so you say that on Monday, but on Tuesday, you promise to pass bipartisan legislation. Either MAGA is an authoritarian force and a threat that must be defeated, or it is a co-equal governing partner and you just have like differences of opinion about levels of taxation. But both things can't be true.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you on that. So I wanted to get a couple of things that's going on now and get your take on it real quick. What is the best way to message? I am against gerrymandering, but I will gerrymander my state to fight for democracy.
Yeah, great question. So the way that you message that is by saying, look, in America, most of us believe that voters pick our leaders. Our leaders do not pick which voters to heed and which to silence. But today, MAGA Republicans, again and again, are proving that they will grab and seize power any way that they can. That's evidenced by them abducting our neighbors, stealing our health care, and moving in and deciding that they will redraw lines because they know voters don't want them. This is a power grab, plain and simple, by a regime of the bullies for the billionaires. And do you know the way that you confront a bully? By calling his bluff, by refusing to back down. And so here we are, we're at a crossroads. We are at the place where we will either allow this power-hungry regime to keep themselves in power and destroy our lives and our loved ones, or we will fight back with every available tool that we have, including ensuring that what the majority of Americans actually want, which is a country of liberty and justice that is indeed for all, can actually have our voices heard. That's it. You say it's a power grab, they're bullies, and you stand up to bullies. You don't get into the details of like, well, actually, no, we're going to retaliate and it's fair because tit for tat and they did a wrong thing and maybe ours is a wrong thing. And eventually we also believe in fair maps. You can't get into those details. You have to reframe the entire endeavor.
Yeah. All right. So listening to this will be a final question, listening to some of the commentary around the police takeover in D.C.
Yeah.
Some folks were warning the Democrats about falling into the trap of not acknowledging crime, just like how they fell into the trap of not acknowledging inflation. One, is that a solid premise to start with? And two, what is the best way to counter the MAGA message about big cities?
Ugh. Big sigh. It is difficult to overstate the stupidity of engaging the tough on crime argument. It is the, canard about mud wrestling a pig, like the pig enjoys it and you're not going to win. If you allow the debate to be, there is so much crime and we need to get tough on crime and they will also get tough on crime and everyone's going to get tough on crime. When you tell people that they should make a decision on the basis of who's going to be a bigger asshole, Democrats are giving it their best to fulfill that role, but Republicans are always going to take that cake. And so first on the bigger question, and then I'll come to the DC of it all, there's extraordinary folks at Vera Institute for Justice, and using initially the work that we've done with the race class narrative, they've now done 70 million research, I lost count, on messaging about this topic. And what they find, because we've done it ourselves and we've verified it over and over again, is that you need to attend to people's underlying desire. When people are talking about crime and they're worried about crime, understandable. What they want is safety. The basic human desire, very understandable for yourself and your loved ones, is you want safety. Of course you do. There is no person on earth that does not want that. And in fact, back to Minnesota, when we were doing focus groups in the wake of the Floyd murder, one of the things we heard in Black groups over and over again was, I want the police to come when I call and to get off my back. We want the police to come when we call and to get off our backs. That is what we heard. And so a message that works is, we know what keeps us safe. It's living in communities where we look out for our neighbors and where we have the things that we need to make it through our lives and care for our loved ones. We know what keeps us safe. It's having the people sworn to serve and protect us, treat us as equals, do their jobs, and respect our rights. We know what keeps us safe. And these MAGA Republicans hope that by making us fear each other and convincing us that safety for some has to come at the expense of justice for others, we will let them take over and steal the things that all of our communities require, from great schools to accessible health care to affordable transit. But we know better. We need to get serious about safety. And Democrats are ready to do it, implementing proven solutions that have made our cities vibrant. So what you want to talk about, the rule of thumb is say what you're for, say what you're for, say what you're for. What you fight, you feed. If you get yourself into a crime is up, crime is down, crime is up, crime is down, as people are doing right now, crime is down 30% in DC. Well, here I have news for you. If you're talking about crime, then you are bringing crime top of mind. You are making people think about crime in an earnest effort to make people think that it's gone down. Second of all, if someone told me my cancer was 30% down, I'd be like, well, the amount of cancer I'd like is 0. Thanks for the news. The amount of crime people would like is 0. So if you're saying crime is down, you're, first of all, crediting the idea that it would be justified for the federal government to send, military and federalized law enforcement into a city, that's a justification. What if it were 20, whatever it was when crime was 30% higher 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I don't know. Was it justified then? Of course not. So you are sort of implicitly crediting their story, which is a bunch of bullshit. That's not the reason why they're in DC. So why are you making believe that it is by answering back, well, crime is down? If facts were going to persuade people, we would not be in this situation. I don't know how anybody can be living in the America of 2025 and think that the facts are going to set us free. That ship, it didn't just sail. It got burned for parts in one of Elon's 57 homes. So basically, the way that you contend with it is, again, you say what you're for and you make clear their motivations. And you say, families are joining together to stop this regime of the bullies for the billionaires from turning our government into a weapon against our people. They are trying to turn our government into a weapon against our people. That's what DC is.
Yeah. All right. So I got to let you go. But because me being selfish, we could have this conversation forever until you tell me to go out and do something. So How do people reach out to you, connect with your company? All they go ahead and give the whole spiel.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So first, I would say you're listening to this, so you're a podcast person. I have a podcast called Words to Win By. It's a narrative podcast. So each episode is about a campaign we won somewhere in the world and how. We make a whole season, we release a whole season. So we've done 3 seasons. It's not, and then we will make another season and release it. It is a feel-good podcast. Almost all the episodes, there are some that break the form, but, the spoiler alert is that we win. That's what happens in every episode. And the point of it is to show, not tell, that progressive ideas not only can win, they do win when you actually message them correctly and when you develop a full surround sound communications campaign and you actually are for policies that help people as opposed to policies that help donors. You got to do all those things. So Words to Win By, if you're into podcasts, listen to it, rate it, review it, all the things. I have a Substack, which I use sometimes. And when I do Substack lives, you'll get alerts. It's also called Words to Win By. Sometimes I rant and rave on Blue Sky. And then importantly, on the asocommunications.com website, when we do projects, we make them open source. That means that on there are messaging guides on how to push back against anti-trans attacks, how to talk about immigrants. We have a lot of our resources in Spanish as well. We do a lot of work in Spanish, how to talk about crime, how to talk about climate change, how to talk about you fill in the blank. It's on there for the most part. And there's also sample ads that we have made and tested. So asocommunications.com if you want resources. And yeah, those are all ways.
Well, Anat Shenker-Osorio, like I said, I'm honored, and I could do this all day because I like talking to people smarter than me. And you are obviously very, very in tune with how to articulate messaging. And I admire your work, and I admire not only your professionalism, but I also admire the way that you make it plain for people. So I'm glad that you agreed to come on the podcast and share that with us.
Well, I'm honored that you asked. Thank you.
All right, guys. And we're going to go ahead and catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. And so now it's time for my next guest, Dr. Stacey Schultz. Dr. Stacey Schultz is a mother, seasoned educational leader, and professionally licensed coach with a proven track record of driving student achievement. As president of Educate LLC, a New York City-based company providing innovation and transformation coaching to educators, she leverages her extensive experience as a teacher and director of special education in a K-12 system. This experience has equipped her with a deep understanding of the challenges faced by learners and a strong ability to build high-performing teams. She holds a doctorate in organizational change and leadership from USC and has completed her executive certificate program in leadership coaching at Georgetown. She is dedicated to continuous learning and data-driven decision-making. An informed, creative, and results-oriented leader with more than 20 years of experience, she is passionate about guiding educators and implementing innovative solutions, including practical technology-based tools to foster meaningful learning experiences for all. Stacey co-hosts the podcast Educate US and is co-author of the book Transforming Collective Power that's due out this year, I believe. In her spare time, she enjoys being active outdoors, traveling to new places, getting lost in a book or a TV series, and spending time with her husband, 3 children, and 2 dogs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Stacey Schultz. All right. Dr. Stacey Schultz. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
Doing good. How about you, Erik?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. I am honored that you accepted my invitation and decided to come on. I have a special spot for educators, teachers, historians, and so you fall into those categories. And just wanted to highlight some of the work that you're doing and talk about education in the United States, at least from your perspective of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this off with a couple of icebreakers.
Okay.
So the first icebreaker I do is offer you a quote, and I want you to respond to the quote. So the quote is, without risk, there is no growth. Without growth, we risk staying exactly where we are. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, I love that quote because, as you know, the work I do in education, we talk a lot about taking risks in our learning. Because if we don't take risks, and risk means something different to everyone. But to me, it's about really trying something new, getting outside of your comfort zone, which really provides you some different level of perspective and experience, which I think is part of what that growth means in that quote. It's like, if we just stay in our myopic view and keep in our own trail, then we don't really expand. And what's important to know, right? It's like our bodies are physically growing and changing every day, and we deserve doing and growing in our mind and in our relationships as well. And so we need to honor that, I believe. And so to really, truly honor that, we need to take some risks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, speaking about risk, I need you to give me we're going to do this thing called 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
1 and 20, 10.
All right. What one fact do you wish people who voted differently than you in the last election knew? Is it about how you vote, about the current state of the world, whatever?
Well, so Erik, I do a lot of voter volunteer work. And for listeners' sake, I do identify with the Democratic Party. Even though, I do agree in some ways the Democratic Party has gotten away from truly identifying with the people, which was the essence of the party. But in my voter volunteer, I do a couple things where I support people to find ways to get out and vote, get all the things they might need, how to make it maybe easier. So some people, sometimes I'm talking to people in Georgia and they might need just a support, like they live really far out and they need to organize a car. So I will work with them to get that free transportation so that they can get to the voter booth or right in states where you can vote, get early voting sent to your house and vote in and know where to go to do early voting. And I also talk to voters who identify as Republican, but have at some point voted Democratic. And so a lot of times when I'm on those calls, the things that I hear are they're not discerning facts for themselves. A lot of times they're listening to the people around them, right? The echo chamber that they might be a part of on social media and all of those things. So I think one fact I would like them to know is to please fact check yourself. Go and if someone's telling you something, check it out yourself and build your own understanding of it, because there are so many times I'm in these dialogues and I'm like, well, can we pause? And I take more of a coaching effect. I'm not slamming anything down someone's throat, but I take more of a coaching conversation and I'll ask, can we just pause? And I want to play this back to you. From your standpoint, does that make sense? Or let's play that scenario out a little more. What might that really look like? And so that's the fact I would want people to really think about.
Okay. Why did you decide to become an educator?
Oh, so I tell this story often, but I didn't want to be an educator at first. But I always was one. So when I grew up in Philly, And of course, I say of course, but I think this is true for most Philadelphia people. Your basketball courts, right? The courts is what we usually call them, are really instrumental in your social life as you're growing up. It's where you meet, you play, you have a lot of pickup games, right? And a lot of people participate in it, and it's a lot of fun. Our basketball courts, when I started going right on my own, had a lot of glass, a lot of like drug needles, and a lot of things and there was a lot of kind of violence happening there instead of what we were all really trying to gather around to be together and play, basketball, run games. And so I wrote the 76ers. I wrote to the recreational department. I kind of did this reach out. I organized a cleanup of all the people that were there. I'm like, let's clean this up. Let's get this going. The Sixers came out. They like redid our court. They painted it, put new hoops up, and we got new lights. The rec department put new lights in. And so it really changed like the momentum of what was going on in that space. And it became more about what we all really wanted it to be about, right? And it provided us a safe space to do that. And then I noticed there was a building that was on the property. I was like, well, can we use this building to do some peer educating? And, and at the time, I think it was 16 or 17. I can't quite remember. But I was like, can we use this building to do some peer educating? Because teenage pregnancy was something that we were seeing a lot of. We were also seeing, as I mentioned, drug use, right? And so can we do that? And the rec department said, sure. So I was able to host these peer, because I was certified, right? And I also brought in other certified people to do some different trainings. And it really, well, first it was a lot of fun, but it really built a different kind of community dynamic. And it's something that was always really important to me, was that like collective care, community. And so when I got out of college, I don't know why, I was really adamant about not being a teacher. And I was like, no. But after about a year out of college, I was like, actually being a teacher really allows me to live into values that are really important to me. And so I did, in fact, become a teacher from there. And one of the things that stood out to me, I had a baby, both of my brothers have passed, but my baby brother struggled through school always, and teachers just didn't know how to help him. And he was an extremely good football player, so he got passed through, and he even got a ton of scholarships to college and all of this stuff. And he was like, no, college is not for me, because the learning was so hard for him. And it was hard for him, I think, because the educators, the adults in the building weren't meeting his needs. And so when I decided to become a teacher, I decided I would become a special education teacher to really support students who weren't necessarily getting their needs met, and helping to provide a new way of thinking about teaching and learning into communities.
Yeah. That's a cool story. So how old were you when you asked the 76ers to help with the basketball court?
I was 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff. That's pretty cool. All right. So I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm going to throw in some descriptives to kind of fill it out. So it's really 3 questions in one. All right. So the question is, how does being blank make you a better educator? So the first descriptor I'll fill in is a mom.
That is a really good question. And the reason I'm like pausing, and one of my own children, so I have 3 children, my middle child receives special education for behavioral issues. He also, has diagnoses that are related to like depression and ADHD and OCD and some other things. And for me, it has clashed a little bit of being a mom and being an educator, because, and I know this isn't exactly your question, but it comes up, there's a lot of tension in it for me, because I see a lot of what's happening in the school for him. And of course, I advocate for him. And I have also empathy for the educators. However, I struggle a little because I know some of what they're doing is not in the best. It's not the best for my son, but also for other kids. And it's a point that is really frustrating for me. And I've tried to raise it in different ways over the years. And one thing I always get is we just don't talk to parents about this stuff. And it's like, okay. But so it's been a little challenging, but the question really was, right, how does being a mom make me a better educator? I think it is that perspective though, right? So flipping that, having that perspective of being a parent, right? And even being on the other side of some assumptions that you hear educators have about parents. I feel like I have now evidence from my own experience of how to disrupt some of that thinking better. I think there are stories that teachers can tell themselves about a relationship with a parent or why they might not be showing up, and I remember talking to another educator like, I can't show up at 9 a.m. Like I have a job too, right? And then there's always this, and not that on a personal note, I always saw that for parents because my parents, worked. My dad had multiple jobs, right? So he wasn't showing up at school either. And it really did bother me when I saw educators have a preconceived notion about whether or not education was important to my family. It's like, no, you're missing the point. But so I think there's a lot, but now I think I can tell the story from my own perspective of, hey, here's what we need to be thinking about. But I think just as a human, I always took almost like a nurturing approach to being an educator anyway, and taking it very seriously that these are other people's kids. And, Lisa Delbert wrote that book, right, many years ago about other people's children, she named it. And even before I read that book, that always resonated with me of like, this is a community experience. And if I am not including parents, if not including family, then I'm not doing this child justice. So that I think in some ways it helps me feel clearer on what I'm able to support educators in thinking about because I have my own perspective now on it, but always operating from a place that acknowledged and respected that there's family involved and they're important in this ecosphere.
Yeah. How does being an athlete make you a better educator?
Some of my team who are not athletes are over my athletic metaphors, but I don't think you need to be I think people don't respect the fact that many people are actually athletes in some shape or form, right? Because to me, being an athlete is about being dedicated to something, to hone and grow in your practice in that, and have a relentlessness about that, right? About I will get better, I will improve, and learning to give yourself grace, especially as I get older as an athlete. And there are just days, right, that, you know what, that is achy and it hurts. And so I'm going to back off a little or I'm going to shorten that up. And so I think there's so many lessons in being an athlete about what does it mean to persevere through pain, through tough moments, to understand that it's not always about getting it right, but about growing. Right. And that there's always an opportunity for that. I also just think being an athlete teaches you a lot about how to navigate and work with others, which has always been important in my work as an educator to me and a value of mine.
Yeah. All right. Finally, how does being a restorative justice advocate make you a better educator?
There's so many layers to that question, I feel like, but at the base of it is just that perspective you bring to it is that the situation isn't always as it seems, right? What you can see is only part of what happens. So how do you really expand your thinking to understanding what else is there? What else happened? And generally speaking, right, because I've always done behavioral work in a lot of ways. behavior is a communicating something, right? And everybody communicates that differently, and everybody has their own spectrum. And so really trying to understand, and helping that other people understand the impact that has on other people too. Right. So there's how do I understand myself better and what happened here, and giving someone a platform for exploring that in a meaningful way. And then also, well, how does that impact others, and what maybe do I need to learn and think about next time? Because it further allowed me as an educator to embrace that value of community and create stronger communities by shifting that thinking for all of us, not just myself, but asking different questions, right? And now I'm by all means have slipped up. Sometimes a kid does something, you're like, what did you do that for? Sometimes it's just like, what? But most of the time, right, it's that I'm able to pause and think and have a different conversation, which allows the, student to respond differently, right? Because now they're not feeling accused. They're not feeling blame, right? And which often leads to shame, right? Which leads to acting out a lot of times. It was more like, hey, let's figure out what happened here together, and take a pause for that and make space for it.
Yeah. All right. What is your strongest value? Daring to lead, being open, humble, and reflective, being innovative, or showing respect?
Ooh, you took from the Educate values. Yes, those are the values that Educate lives by. I'm going to go with open, humble, and reflective. I think, it's a journey really to that. And I think when you can do that, you can do those other things. You can be more respectful, almost as I was just talking about with the restorative justice, right? If you can understand yourself, you can also understand the impact you're having on others and consider that. I think what it means to be humble, right? And learn to make space for other people and understand that there's so much beauty in what everybody brings to the table. Like, it really pushes your thinking on what's possible, right? So I love that open and humbleness, that we're all bringing something so beautiful here and being open to what we might create. Like Adrienne Marie Brown talks a lot about an emergent strategy, right? Like who's here right now is creating something unique. And to me, that's part of what open and humble is also about. And then reflective, which I think it's more than reflective to me, because I think there needs to be action. I think it's great if you acknowledge these things, but then what accountability and responsibility are you taking to those things you're reflecting on?
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned the name. What is Educate LLC? And in explaining that, kind of go into defining what the innovation spectrum is.
Yeah. So I'll first tell you, Educate LLC is now actually Educate, because we were acquired by a company called Change Force, and they do change management, mostly in higher education and corporate space. So we're their first kind of K-12 arm. And so we have kept the branding and the work of Educate itself. And so you asked what we do, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I always get caught up in I have to explain that because we haven't shown that yet. And so we, at the floor, what we do is really build partnerships and relationships with schools to help them realize their potential, right? That create meaningful learning, relevant learning experiences for all people in their community. So for us, that's family, that's school leaders, that's staff, all the various staff, that's the teachers and the students, right? And so we really work at the point of supporting directly adults. We have all been educators ourselves. We have all been leaders in some capacity ourselves. And so we are coming from a very rich and diverse teaching and learning backgrounds that allow us to bring a lot of efficacy to the work that we're doing. And we like to call that collective efficacy, because we also see ourselves as a whole team. Like when you get an Educate coach to support you in your journey, you're getting the whole Educate bench. You're not just getting one person. And so we really emphasize that. We also, at the inception of Educate, it was about bringing technology into classrooms meaningfully. We have expanded beyond that because it's like technology is a vehicle. So it's definitely a part of our forte, but it's only a part of it. And with AI, because there's so many implications for teaching and learning with AI, we have been supporting our schools and really diving deep in, well, what does that mean to them? What does that look like? How do they think about it? How do they challenge some things? How do they leverage and work with AI? And we also created our own AI product called Unlock AI with educators, because something really unique about us is we are in schools every day, our team, right? We're in schools with educators every day. So we're able to truly build this alongside of educators, and consistently we innovate with our educators and to really meet their needs. And so it's LLM agnostic, but it's built in these closed chambers, so to speak, with not only the codification of our research, which is leveraged in the innovation spectrum and all of the 25 years of our work and experience, but also the schools. So each school that engages with Unlock can put in their sort of philosophies, scholarship, etc., that they leverage to really influence teaching and learning in their school.
Yeah. So what does transformation in the classroom look like?
So to us, we love to meet people where they're at. So what we're also saying though, is that as educators, our responsibility is to ensure that students are ready for their future, which means what is the future they want to realize. And sometimes kids don't know that. So at the minimum for us, it's about them being able to recognize economic prosperity that provides them with a life, right, that they can appreciate. And most students can acknowledge what that means to them. So they might not be able to say, hey, this is how I want to get there, but this is how I want to live, right? And so we know we can ground in that. And then working backwards from there of, okay, so if this is what the future is calling, right? These are the kinds of skills and capacities that students need, and how that we keep on top of how is that changing, which is changing rapidly these days, right? How do we backtrack and support? Okay, and here's where instruction is now. What does that mean about how this classroom needs to transform and evolve to meet that need to really ensure students are able to live into the future they want? And so that's really what, I know it's not a direct answer, but we're working with people that are at so many different levels instructionally, and classrooms look so very different across the schools, across the country, across the world, right? So we really acknowledge that and meet people where they're at.
Yeah. All right. So how will the dissolution of the U.S. Department of Education impact your work?
Some of that is still, I think, yet to be seen. I think immediately, like our world, and I've gone on different news channels and podcasts, and I've spoken to, my concern is what the Department of Education, and it's a pretty new department. I know the rhetoric is, it's been around. It has not been around that long, right? So, but what it was, and what it was trying to achieve is ensuring, right, that there is a standard of education across this country. And whether or not I agree with how they were creating that standard or the policy, because I'll say not everything they were doing do I agree with. I think there are ways to better create, equity within education across this country. But the fact that that's what they were striving for. They were striving to have, this is the benchmark for how our young people of our country, right, can be tomorrow's leaders. And that is, I know, aspirational, and there's a lot of messiness, but that is what worries me most, is by taking that away, there's no benchmark. Then who's defining that benchmark? A private organization? But how do we trust that they're doing that in the best interest of everyone around them and not in their own interests, right? The other thing that worries me about dissolving the Department of Education is not having someone investigate the different civil rights violations that might be happening in different parts of the country, in different classrooms, in different schools. Then, if you're, and every state still has one, right? But there is some national sort of, again, kind of coming back to this national standard that we might have for what should be happening in our schools. And so I think that's really important as a country, any country, right, to have something like that, some kind of body governing that and ensuring that. And also one other thing that the Department of Education, aside from title funding, which I do believe, other groups could potentially monitor, but again, kind of coming back to, without tying it to equity, how will this money get distributed is a concern, right? So these are real concerns that will impact schools, and a lot of schools that don't even realize that it's going to impact them. And in fact, when Trump originally froze the title funding, right, earlier this summer, I think states all over were going crazy, right? Because they were like, wait a minute, and so many states that actually voted for Trump were going to be deeply impacted by that. Because there's a lot of disparity in, well, not all of our states, unfortunately, but as far as economic disparity, there's a lot within kind of our Midwest part of the country, and they get a lot of federal funding because they don't have a lot of state funding. So, that funding was released. I'll be really curious as to see how does that get allocated in the future. One thing they talk about is going back to the states, giving the money directly to them to figure out. I mean, we'll see. We'll have to watch and see how that gets disseminated as we go forward. But there's definitely a growing concern, around so many pieces of this that I do think it's just very important. And countries that are, outpacing us as far as students being ready and jobs and et cetera, have very strong national systems. And we don't have a national system, actually. We have a state-by-state system that has some national governing, some. And that's another thing that people don't seem to understand, is actually we don't really even have, like, that department is getting sort of unfairly judged too, because they also don't have the power, right, that other maybe national agencies do, because it really is, for the most part, most things are state, laws for education.
Yeah. All right. Which congressional legislation will have the longest effect? The Big Beautiful Bill or the Educational Choice for Children Act?
Well, they put it in the Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah.
Right? The act.
Yeah.
So since it's a part of that, I'm going to go with Big Beautiful Bill.
Okay.
Because what was really discouraging to me is that Big Beautiful Bill had so many parts that were so harmful to people. And we will see those trickling effects, I think, for years and years to come, because repassing a bill like that to undo all of those pieces at once, I think, will be hard to do. They often say, right, like policy people, like if they hadn't put the ECCA in the Big Beautiful Bill, it wouldn't have gotten passed, actually. So it was kind of passed in the shadows because there were really important issues like healthcare at the forefront, right? And other issues that got a little overshadowed and not as talked about, which is, unfortunate in a lot of ways, because I do believe healthcare and education are so tightly wrapped right? Especially when we think about education and the potential of it giving children the opportunity to have economic prosperity. And we know when people have economic prosperity, they have less health issues, right? So we're kind of in this cycle, and we need to talk more and more about how they intersect. And I do appreciate there are agencies out there that do that and bring that whole as like a whole justice issue, right? There's like many parts to that. And I truly support that, like the Urban League, right? That does a lot of that work.
Yeah.
So I think it will just have a lot of what I see as writing on the wall is like, how are we privatizing more and more of this stuff, which just further creates economic burden on people that is really unjust.
Yeah. So what is the biggest challenge in education right now?
I mean, I think it's the age-old challenge. You know, the model is antiquated and has been for some time, and that's not new information. But when you really haven't been able to break out of the box of that, I think, you're just perpetuating the challenges over and over again, right? You're not really disrupting any cycle that is not working. Now, even within that, though, I think I want to acknowledge there are some schools in pockets everywhere that are doing amazing things, right? Even within the confines of those challenges, right? They have found and created communities. And I was a part of one, Eastside Community High School on the Lower East Side in New York City. It was a consortium school, and it very much was like that. It was like a lot of innovative cycles, a lot of opportunity for students. And in fact, like they measured, like, what are students doing 5 years after graduation? Our measure was not, can we get students to graduate? Our measure was, what success are they having 5 years out of the school? And I think that creates a different environment, right? If that's the end goal, or not, I shouldn't say end goal, but if that's how you're really looking at, have we done our jobs? You really think differently about, well, what does this school experience look like within these confines? And I think that kind of thinking is not happening enough. And I also think it's challenging thinking, right? It's challenging to think about that. So I think it needs, personally, a heavier hand of disrupting some of these confines that we have to allow for communities and, schools to really redefine what is needed for our students. And some of that is going to have to shift on, like, well, how are we holding schools accountable? Because this also locks us in if we're currently measure school accountability on whether or not they're passing these standardized tests. And we know a lot of the challenges with these standardized tests. And yet we still haven't worked to shift that, right? And it's a big machine, like similar in healthcare to the insurance machine that's out there. Education, the testing machine is deep. And there's a lot of money wrapped in that. There's curriculum wrapped in that. There's a lot to untangle there. So to really have lawmakers say, you know what, we're going to shift the way we measure meaningful outcomes for schools. If we can go there, and schools have some flexibility to define how they get there with their community, right? I think we get to shift education. We're just so stuck in so many ways. And again, I want to acknowledge those pockets out there that are not stuck and really are serving students well. But I also think, on a personal note, some of the heavy layer of school choice is actually creating a distraction from that. And I've gone into some of first of all, what you also see from a percentage wise, people taking advantage of that are often people that were already sending their kids to private schools. And on top of that, when you go to these schools, it's not like there's not very different teaching and learning happening, actually. And so, there's a lot of I just don't see how and in a lot of the study and research, right, they show in places where they've already had school choice that it hasn't really changed student outcomes. So I think it's more of a distraction rather than addressing some of the bigger issues. It just creates a distraction like, well, natural competition of capitalism will make it better. I'm like, what? How has that ever made anything better? Yeah, it's just an interesting thing to me. I'm like, wait, what? Why do we think that? And then, because a lot of people that are out there advocating for that aren't, and maybe never have truly experienced what schools are like around this country and really gone into them. And no, they don't. I don't think for most of them that there's a real knowing actually of what's happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Stacey Schultz, we'll have to end it there. But I do appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that through Educate that you're going to continue to find solutions to address some of the concerns we talked about today. But I just want to commend you for, now that I've gotten to talk to you a little bit, your lifetime of service and commitment, and hope that you have much continued success. So thank you again for what you do, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Erik. It was great to be here.
All right. All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Anat Shenker-Osorio and Dr. Stacey Schultz for coming on the program. I had not heard Dr. Schultz before. And before I go anywhere, I apologize, y'all. And I definitely apologize to Dr. Schultz, because normally at the end of the interviews, I give them a moment to plug what they're doing, about, their companies or their, social media, their podcasts, whatever the case. And we were kind of pressed for time. And so I was very conscious of that. So I just kind of wrapped up the interview and then realized I didn't give her moment. So Dr. Schultz has a podcast called Educate US, which of course is a play on Educate Us. And, so please listen to that. If you want to get, like I said in the interview, we kind of scratched the surface on education, but that's what that podcast is all about. So if you like what you heard in the interview, please go to Educate US and, and get more nuanced and detailed conversations about that. And hopefully we didn't even get into the book, even in the casual conversation. I know she's been working on this book for a while. Hopefully it's going to come out this year. It's going to be called Transforming Collective Power. You can reach her. The best way to get her on social media is on her LinkedIn file. So, Dr. Stacey Schultz. And so Stacey, Dr. Schultz, I apologize for not giving you the moment to plug yourself. Yeah, because that's something I deliberately try to do for all my guests. So hopefully the plug I gave would be adequate. And, Anat is, she's special. And just like, some of the other guests that you've heard me use that term before, these are people that I've followed or have heard on different podcasts or on the news, and, just really, just right to the meat of it, just gets right into, how you feel. I mean, I threw out a question at her, how to message something, and she, just like that, was able to have a message that could resonate with people. And I hope that, fortunately I record these with notes, so I'll be able to get it verbatim, the messaging, and I might be able to spend that myself or share it with some folks running for office that need to address certain issues. Right. But Anat she's really an American treasure. And I hope that was conveyed in the interview as well. So having said all that, there is a message that's out there that I think we just need to say it out loud and not stop tap dancing around it. People like Anat might not agree with how I'm about to go with it, but it is what it is. If you watch CNN, and, to be honest, I have to watch the clips. I can't sit through a whole thing because the clips bother the hell out of me, right? It's just gotten to a point now where we're just sticking anybody on. If we were doing man on the street things, if we were doing live remotes, even the stuff that Jordan Klepper does on The Daily Show, right? It just talking to random people about thoughts, and, people might say something unique. I won't say crazy, but let's say unique, something a little bit out the norm. That's okay. But when you have these shows on these networks, whether it's Fox or MSNBC, CNN, OAN, whatever, right? CBS, NBC, ABC, whatever. You want people that are knowledgeable about the particular issues so that you can have an educated conversation. It might get emotional. It all depends on the person's decorum and professionalism. But for the most part, you want to have a discussion where you can really flesh out some ideas and put some thoughts in people's heads, regardless of what agenda you're kind of subtly pushing out there. You want to have a great discussion. But then you put these folks on, and I guess, I'm of the Christian faith, so part of our theology is that God doesn't really make mistakes. He puts us in positions to observe and to experience and to navigate through so that we can give a better testimony of his existence and his works, right? But sometimes, I just really, all of us have Garden of Gethsemane moments, especially in this political discussion. Is like, why, Lord? Why me? Why did I have to see that? Why did I have to hear that? Right. But I guess the nuance, the value of that is it leads me to what I need to say. And it's like, America, as much as you don't want to admit it, all of this is about racism. Everything. Even in your subconscious, you thought that a white guy who has failed in business 6 times and, bankruptcies, right? Although, you got to take risks. We talked about that at this, in this show and previous episodes. We've had people that think we shouldn't be averse to risk, but you felt that this guy was better at reducing your price of eggs than the black woman who was the sitting vice president, right? That's, as much as you want to deny it, that's pretty racist. When you look at the qualifications, it's a pretty racist decision because trust is a part of that. And I've addressed this before when I ran for the U.S. Senate and we had these, autopsies about the 2008 election, right? That was the thing I was trying to convey to people. It's like, you're not used to seeing a black person in a position where they're making those kind of decisions. So you didn't trust that, right? So you didn't vote for that. You voted for what you were comfortable with. You voted for what you knew. And where it's not put the hood on and go burn crosses at night kind of racism, it's still racism. And it's something that all of us in America have to deal with. All of us have preconceived notions based on what we've been exposed to, right? Of people that are different than us. Doesn't matter if they're Asian, doesn't matter if they're Latino, doesn't matter if they're black, doesn't matter if they're white. We all have those notions. Skinner talked about in his essay, What is Man? That we naturally have prejudices, right? We believe that You know, if you put an apple and an orange in front of somebody, people are going to go with what fruit they like. They're going to either reach for the orange or reach for the apple. It doesn't mean that the orange doesn't have value or the apple doesn't have value. It means that that person has a preference about what fruit they want to eat, right? It's when we start incorporating that prejudice into our institutions and we start placing value on that prejudice within those institutions. That's when we get institutional racism. That's when we get cultural racism, right? Because white is supposed to be better than black and Asian is supposed to be better than Latino and whatever, right? Instead of pitting people against each other based on their ethnicity or their nationality or the amount of melanin they have in their skin, let's pit people based on what do you know, what do you bring to the table, what kind of person are you, as opposed to what I'm uncomfortable with, right? And so, you know, one of the things we have to acknowledge in the United States of America is that our history is based on the fact that we institutionalized racism and people took advantage of that. And it's very, very uncomfortable to talk about. It's very, very uncomfortable to rehash. But in order to get better, you got to learn from your mistakes. Football players every week sit through hours and hours of film. Why? They know how to play the game of football. They know the difference between an A gap and a B gap. They know the difference between a slot and a go route. They know that naturally. But it all comes down to execution. And what happens is that the other team is trying to do things so you can't execute the way that you want to execute, right? So you watch film to learn from your mistakes. How did that person beat that block? How did that person intercept that pass, right? That's what you study. You learn by not only practice, but also visualization. You want to see where the mistakes are. You want to recall. You want to have that history so that you don't repeat this same mistake. If you don't take your film study seriously, if you don't take your practice seriously, you're not going to win and you're probably not going to be playing much longer, right? So if athletes understand the value of history, why not the rest of us? Why is that a problem? I'm sure those athletes don't want to see a tape in a game that they got beat 49-0. I promise you they don't want to see that. But if they can turn around and take that loss and turn around and beat the next team 6-3, they've learned something from it. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, it's painful to look at America's history, especially if you're a person of color. It's painful to think that somebody that was related to me was told that they couldn't drink out of a certain water fountain and they had to sit in a certain part of a bus, or they couldn't even go to a particular restaurant. Or if they went to a store, they had to come in the back instead of the front door. That's painful to think about. It's painful to think about that somebody related to me was whipped and flogged for not meeting their share of cotton picking, right? That's painful. It's painful to think that people were killed for standing up for their basic rights as a human being. That's painful. But we learn that so that, one, we can draw inspiration from the courage that these people had to exhibit and the strength to endure all of that, to give us the hope that we can go forward and can do better. Because through all the pain, there was also some joy. There was also some victories. There was also some satisfaction, right? Because even if you get beat as a team 49-0, there were some good things that you as an individual did, or some things that your teammates did that you also need to repeat. So if everybody is in concert, you won't get beat 49-0 anymore, right? And the same with us. We learn how to avoid these situations so we won't be subjugated like that anymore, right? So when we protest, when we say, hey, we got a problem. When we say ouch, you need to deal with that. When your body expresses pain, whether it's your wrist, whether it's your knees, whether you get a cut, even if you have some kind of trauma, your body's going to react to that. And the natural thing is your body's going to try to fix it intuitively, right? It's going to try to repair itself. If you get a cold, that's why you take these medicines. That's why we're supposed to take vaccines, Mr. Secretary, so we can help our bodies fight things off, right? But we also learn from that, right? So we try, not to do things that put that kind of strain on our body or pain, or avoid situations where we could get this virus or get this cold, whatever we got to do. That's why in the wintertime we bundle up, and in summertime we try to shed as much clothing we can get away with, because your body needs to be comfortable. It needs to operate at a normal temperature of 98 degrees, 98.6 to be exact, right? It's learning, it's evolving, which is a word that conservatives are allergic to, right? That's why when they talk about make America great again, that is the ultimate conservative slogan. Because one, it's a fallacy. We've never been as great as we should have been. Therefore, we can't go back to something that we never fully achieved, right? And then you have this preconceived notion, well, some of us had it better than others, so let's go back to that, instead of the struggle of competing in an equal playing field. That's racism. So when Jillian Michaels laments and says that the Smithsonian Institution National Museum for African American History is an anti-white person institution, that's racism. It's a celebration of the history of African people in the United States. And whether you want to call yourself a Black American or African American or Afro or whatever, that museum is about us, right? Whether we immigrated from the Caribbean or Africa directly or some Latin American country or whatever. It's a story about us. Now, white folks played a major supporting role in that story. No question. But it ain't about y'all. It's about us. Get over that. You're offended by the fact that there's government money being spent to tell our story. That's a problem. Our story is as important, if not the most important story in the American history. The relationships between Black folks and white folks. It's kind of the underlying foundation of this nation. It is really the barometer of whether we can be great or not. And if you're too fragile, if you're too ill-equipped to deal with that, I don't know what I can do to help you. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I guess there's some counseling you can take, but you've got to get over that. Because the sooner you get over that, the sooner we can get to that greatness that has eluded us. You can't be great again if you never were great. Joe Biden's phrase was corny, but it was more accurate. Build better or build back better. Mississippi had the best slogan. Onward. From this point forward. Onward. From this moment in time. Onward. When we say don't look back, it means don't get caught up in your mistakes. You need to know where you came from because that's your point of origin. But don't get stuck back there, right? Learn from your mistakes. Learn from your past transgressions. Learn from your inconsistencies and do better. And why is that a problem for a certain section of the population? That's the question. Why is it a problem to challenge you to do better? Why is it a problem for you to accept the fact that there are people that don't look like you, that don't have the same life experience as you that coexist with you. Why is that a problem? Because there was nothing in any book, whether you can find the Torah, the Quran, the Holy Bible, there's nothing in there that says that you're not going to deal with other people. As a matter of fact, most of those books encourage you, I would say all three, encourage you to interact with other people. You are supposed to be the example of the faith that you are a part of. Even if you don't believe in any organized religion, if you don't believe in the existence of God, you know as a human being that you have to interact with other human beings. You did not come to this planet by yourself. You needed another human being to get here. So you have to have a relationship with that human, or at least try, right? If nobody else. You may come in a situation where there's other humans in the house with you that came through that same journey. You've got to interact with them. And those people, even though they have the same last name as you, even though they live in the same house as you, are just as different as can be, because everybody has to have their own journey. So if you can learn to coexist with different people in your house, why is it a problem for you to interact with different people outside of your house? That's what we call maturity, right? That's why you go through all these emotions. When you're a baby, you're learning stuff, you're developing. When you're a toddler, you're developing. When you're in elementary school, you're developing. When you're in high school, it's almost like you're going back to being a baby, because now you're about to take the next step to adulthood. And then when you get to be an adult, you've got to learn how to make decisions and survive on your own. It's evolution. It's constantly changing until the day that we cease to exist, right? Whenever that day may be. It could be tomorrow. It could be 30 years from now. Whenever that day comes, that's when you stop evolving, in a sense, right? Intellectually or physically or whatever. But if you count decomposition, you're evolving then too. All I'm saying is, if your politics is based on your level of discomfort, your politics is based on your fear of the unknown, if your politics is based on your insecurities, you need to get out of that. You need to focus your politics on what's best for my house, my neighborhood, my community, my city, my state, my nation. That's how that's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be about, well, I don't want to see people that I don't know, that I can't relate to. I don't want to see them succeed. I don't want them to make me feel guilty for what happened in the past. I think if you feel guilty about something, even if you didn't directly have anything to do with it, it means that you're human. It means that you have empathy, right? And it should put something in your soul to make sure that that never happens again. Because I don't want my great-grandchildren to feel the same guilt that I'm feeling now. That's how it should trigger in your brain. We have to do better. You know, we made the evolution from throwing garbage in the street to actually having a sewer system, right? We evolved from having outhouses to indoor bathrooms. We evolved. So we don't want to go back to the stuff. We want to go onward. We want to go forward. We want to progress. There's no way that anybody can convince me that progress is a bad word and say, oh, he's a progressive. I probably need to listen to him. She's a progressive. I probably need to listen to her, because where we are right now, that's a conservative thought. You want to stay with that, and that's not working. Yeah, maybe it's time to explore some other options. Let's transform. Let's change things. Let's see if we can do better next time, right? And you don't have to feel guilty because you didn't make it. the first time that you made a mistake? You know, we're human. So we have guilt. We have regrets, but we can't dwell on those. We got to shake that off and keep going forward. And even if we're reminded of something that we did, you have to have the mental fortitude to realize I'm a better person than when that happened. We should say that America is a better society now than when it happened. And our goal is to make it even better, not to go back. We want to make America great again. We want to make America more racist than ever, because there's been no period where we've been great. We've been better than average. But anytime you have a society where not everybody can participate in it, that's not greatness. Never has, never will be. I don't care who you date. I don't care what you want to identify as. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care how much melanin you got in your skin. It does not matter to me. What matters to me is, are you going to make it better for all of us to exist? Whether that's in government, whether that's in sports, entertainment, whatever. I want the best people doing the work. Science and technology, all that. I just want the best people doing the work. Whatever people do to make them feel good about themselves outside of their chosen profession, I don't care. I don't care if the best physicist in the world listens to rap music. I don't care. I don't care if they listen to rock music. I don't care. I want them to help us unlock more mysteries in the universe, which may mean that I'll get a cell phone that never goes out of service, right? Or an internet that is always at the top bandwidth. That's what I want. You know, and it's like people say, well, you know, slavery wasn't just an American thing and all that. I don't care. You know what I'm saying? From a historical standpoint, that's great to know. But since I'm an American, I'm dealing with what happened in American history first. I'm not worried about slavery in Arabia or slavery in Rome or slavery in Jerusalem. I'm worried about the slavery that happened here in the United States and what impact does that have on us now? Because there has been some residual impact, right? Please, ladies and gentlemen, get over your insecurities. Get over your fear. Get over your lack of comfort and focus in on what is best for all of us. If you want to be mad because you lost an athletic event to somebody that identifies as the same gender as you, that wasn't born that way, and you both ended up in 5th place, if that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. But don't impose your discomfort, your lack of self-esteem on the rest of us. If you are uncomfortable with the fact that there is a museum that reminds you that slavery actually happened in the United States, and it was not a good thing for a certain group of people who still exist in this country, and it vilifies your group, get over it. Understand that we just can't have that kind of mentality. The mentality that allowed that to happen, we can't have that mentality anymore. And if you feel guilt, use it to do something better rather than complain about it. Complain about the fact that you actually have empathy. Complain about the fact that you actually have a human emotion. Why are you mad that you are guilty? You feel guilty. You should embrace that, and that should give you a challenge to do better. You could be great if you stop getting mad about being guilty. All right, y'all, I gotta go. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.